JP Morgan, this was later found in an investigation. He took $39 million from the Treasury that was supposed to, like you were just saying with BlackRock, help, put it in his own bank, didn't pay any interest on it, and then he loaned it to the smaller banks for a fee. Control Alt Invest, James. We're doing it again. I was listening to some of our pods, and we're mad.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot to be mad about.
Yep.
I'm your host, Jason Bonnersmith. I'm here with James Goodwillie. I know you're fine. I'm not going to ask you.
Yeah, don't ask.
As we dive into ways to reset thoughts on wealth, we've done a lot of tearing down the walls, tearing down the facade that Wall Street's built. It's funny, some of the feedback we get where people are like almost defensive.
Yeah.
I have one friend who he's comfortable and he doesn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
He loves his 401.
Yeah.
He wants to go to work every day. He doesn't want to have to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it works out for him.
Yeah.
I started to think maybe we're a little too pessimistic. Do you think we're too pessimistic?
Nah. No.
Realist.
Yeah, exactly. The world's a dark place. Let's talk about it.
I have noticed lately, you know how they say, you never notice a yellow Chevy and then somebody says, hey, I'm shopping for a yellow Chevy. And then when you drive around, all you see is...
Yeah. Yellow Chevys.
That's been me lately. I've seen nothing but people talking about pivoting away from Wall Street and finding alternative routes of investment.
Well, that's good. I think it's good.
Yeah.
I think it is kind of catching on to the world or America of people being like, is it as good as people say?
So we just did a podcast on hedge funds. That was an enjoyable conversation. And that was me being like on my high horse, like look at, I was trying to pivot them to be, we talked a lot about potential oligarchs. That was fun.
Yep.
I know you have something that sticks in your crawl that we get to talk about today.
Yes.
What you want to bring up could easily be misconstrued as, oh, this is recent.
Yeah.
It's not. I think that this is a small pivot off of the oligarch conversation we had last time about, has it always been this way and we just haven't admitted it to ourselves? And we agree that this whole investment structure, this investment vehicle has been gamified. We've talked about that endlessly. And it comes down to power, right? Would you agree with that?
Yep.
When there's chaos, which there's always chaos.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite things in the last 5 or 10 years is I've really gotten into Stoicism. And one of the core tenets is what's going on in your life is not new. Every person in history has had something that feels like it rocks their boat. People in the midst of chaos have an opportunity to grab power. And we've seen that. That's what we'll talk about today. That's the little preview.
Yep.
I'm going to go this aggressive route and then we'll back off of it a bit. I think it's a very clear line to capitalizing on chaos. And that's essentially where dictators come from.
Yeah.
So Hitler, in the midst of chaos in Germany, convinced the president to give him emergency powers. That's how he got where he went.
Yep.
Mussolini, I don't think I said that right. A lot of economic hardship and social disorder. Gaddafi, your boy.
Mm-hmm.
What was the book you read?
All the Worst Humans.
Yeah. And there was a story about his son in there. But that guy, he was like a revolutionary that people got behind. And then he used manufactured crisis to seize power. And now he's a evil dictator.
Yeah. Well, he's dead, but yeah.
Oh, he's dead.
Yeah.
Okay. But his
Yeah,
son.
he got murdered in the streets.
Oh.
Yeah. The whole Arab Spring.
I told you, I know that was post 80s. But
yeah. Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. They caught him and dragged him through the streets and then hung him.
They being the people of
Of Libya.
What about his son?
He was killed way before,
Oh, interesting.
if I'm not mistaken.
All right. Well, some sort of justice somewhere, it seems.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the best way to go, but in America, when you seize on chaos, you don't become a dictator, you own a bank.
Yep.
You like that?
I do like that, yeah.
The first time was 1907 with JP Morgan. This is not a history podcast, but I want to frame it up because when we're talking about giving Wall Street the middle finger, I think it's important to understand how we got here and what we can do to maybe one day through our... We're not going to... I'll tell you this. We're not dragging anybody through the streets.
No.
I'm not advocating for that.
For sure.
But we can take power back, for sure.
Yep.
So 1907, Wall Street was on the edge of collapse. Panic was going through New York. There was a run on the banks. You know, back then, correct me if I'm wrong, that was pre-gold standard. Or that was gold standard.
That was gold standard.
That was gold standard. It was pre-FDIC. That's what I was thinking of. Sorry.
Yes.
Pre-FDIC.
Correct.
So run on the banks. We talked about last time how the American presidents don't necessarily know banking. They don't know treasury. And they turned to him and they said, hey, help us. And he essentially became this, he got to pick who survived and who didn't. Picked up competitors because he got to be in the room, essentially. Consolidated power. And by the end of the crisis, he and a couple of his buddies controlled all of America's banks and never really looked back. So much so that was 1907. 1913 was when the Federal Reserve was brought about. And that was in response to what had happened because they ended up doing a congressional investigation and found that 3 men controlled over $2 billion because of their grip on 18 corporations. So we had all this power concentrated at the top. The entire system's going to bend to their will.
Yep.
I'm going to pause there because, again, history repeats itself.
Always.
What in modern day times have you seen that might look like JP Morgan?
2 companies, entities, whatever you want to call them, BlackRock and Vanguard in particular.
I knew you were going to say that.
Did you?
They control over $19 trillion in assets.
Yeah. Depending on when you're looking at it, it could be upwards of like 22.
So what does that mean to you?
It means if they were a country, they would be the biggest economy of any country in the world.
Including
the United States.
Yeah.
Or China. You could roll up, besides the US and China, you could probably roll up a majority of countries in the entire planet and still not be that high.
Who founded BlackRock?
Larry Fink, a guy by the name of Larry Fink. You know how past couple of years, since you've been in the commercial real estate side, you know how the past couple of years they're talking about like how these big investment companies keep buying up all the rentals, buying up houses and turning them into rentals? That's a company called Blackstone. That's been around longer than BlackRock. And Larry Fink was kind of like the right-hand man of the guy who started Blackstone.
And then, so now BlackRock is a what?
Massive
conglomerate.
Yeah, however you want to say it. I mean, they operate in a lot of different areas. Yeah.
So can I call BlackRock and invest with them?
No, probably not. But you could buy their stuff. So they have index funds. They have things like that. So Vanguard started the index. They created the index fund in the 70s, right? The guy who created Vanguard. But now they all have the ETFs. They all have index funds and all that. So if you have a 401k, it's in either Vanguard or BlackRock.
So it's not a hedge fund, I guess is what I was getting at.
No, it is far surpassed a hedge fund.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're past that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They would like look at a hedge fund and laugh. Like it's a joke.
So a hedge fund needs other people's money a hedge fund takes rich people's money to invest and do stuff with. BlackRock has so much money, they don't need other people's money.
They take the world's money, right? The hedge funds take rich people's money. BlackRock takes everyone's money, right? So they control the people's money, everyone who has any money in the stock market, they control some of that, as well as, and I'm sure we'll get to it in a bit, country's money.
How?
Power.
No, but like, how do they have? You're saying they control the money. They don't. It's not money they've taken in, right? So the other countries are not the investor, or they
Oh,
are.
yeah.
They are.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
There's other countries that invest with BlackRock, including our own, or indirectly invest with BlackRock. And what I mean by that is, so during 2020 chaos, right? The Federal Reserve gave about $750 billion to BlackRock and said, go buy corporate bonds to make sure that companies don't fail. Because the Federal Reserve can't handle that, right? Like they're not going to be able to go out and be like, all right, this is a good one to buy. This is not a good one to buy. So they outsourced it to BlackRock. They had no bids, right? They didn't say like, all right, hey, who's the best person? Everybody submit their strategies or proposals. They just said, hey, BlackRock, come here real quick. Here's $750 billion. Make sure that no companies, like big companies, fail. And what they did is they went and bought their own ETFs. So yeah, I mean, it's not like America said, we're going to go buy your ETFs, but they gave them a $750 billion check and said, we'll look the other way. Just go make sure that nothing crashes.
That's disturbing.
And it's not the first time. That's one of a few times that the government has, and that's just our government. There's other governments in the world that do the same thing with BlackRock.
I liken it to this. Let's say you live on the shoreline. You're an expert in tsunamis, and one day there's a tsunami warning. And in the chaos, your whole town looks to you for guidance. You're like, "Hey, James, we know there was an earthquake a few miles offshore. I'm concerned about a tsunami. You are also concerned because obviously it's a natural byproduct. But you had a buddy that's he has a fishing boat, so he's way offshore. And you guys happened to chat, and he was like, it's this going to be very small. This isn't going to be as big as people think. But in your town, people are looking to you to kind of calm the chaos and say, hey, what's going to happen? And instead of saying, let's just stay steady and ride it out, we'll get a little bit of a flood, but it won't be massive. You go, yeah, I'll tell you what. I know you're scared. Sell me your property, and you can run and you can cash out now, and I'll take on the risk myself, and I'll rebuild the town, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially what they did. What happened was JP Morgan, this was later found in an investigation, he took $39 million from the Treasury that was supposed to, like you were just saying with BlackRock, help, put it in his own bank, didn't pay any interest on it, and then he loaned it to the smaller banks for a fee, at a higher interest rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, to your point of history repeating itself, BlackRock does that every single day. BlackRock was one of the big proponents of the green deal type stuff and pushing that whole wave of energy, getting off of fossil fuels and things like that. And so because of the power that they wield, they were influencing government and these policies, and then also influencing the corporations to adopt these types of strategies. And in the meantime, they were investing more and more money into like Saudi Arabia and fossil fuels and gas companies and oil companies. So they had this whole thing of power that they exerted over these companies to force their hand to do all of this stuff around energy and making the planet better. And then behind the scenes, investing even more money. And then fast forward a couple of years, and they're like, yeah, we don't really know if the whole Green New Deal thing is even worth it. And so but come to find out they'd been shorting a lot of those companies because of the extra costs associated with having to uphold that standard and do all of those things. So yeah, just fully taking advantage of it. And that's one of 100 examples I could give you.
To what end, though? Because when there is a tipping point on money where, I mean, what are you going to buy? Another planet?
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? I don't know how we unravel it. They're so powerful. They're between the two of them, either BlackRock or Vanguard, they're the majority shareholder of over 90% of the companies on the S&P 500. Think about that. There's no like Jeff Bezos who, right? Tim Cook who, like it doesn't matter. Those guys own it. And so they're the majority shareholders. And most of the time, that's just one of them that's the majority. But both of them own stock in every company on the S&P 500. And if you combined their shares, or the equity they have in those companies, if you combine them, they own outright 20%, I think it is, of the S&P 500.
Of the whole thing.
The whole thing.
So what does that mean for the person who's getting into investing and wants to buy some stock?
You better hope your strategy and your thought process aligns with what those two companies are going to do.
Because they bully, like we talked about before, they bully the market around. They're in a position where no matter what happens externally, they're safe, or they could be. They have the levers to pull.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, if you want to think about it this way, like the hedge funds, right? They're the like apex predators. So they're almost like the big game hunters of the world. They go to these nature reserves, these millions of acre nature reserves with all kinds of animals, and they go and try and find like the biggest elephant. And sometimes they succeed, and most of the time they do, and they may have some shady method to do it, but that's where all the spotlight is, right? On those big game hunters, because they capture a big prize. BlackRock and Vanguard are the ones who own every nature preserve in the world, right? They own all the elephants. They own all the lions. They own all of it. So everybody else is just trying to find that lion or find that thing to hunt and hope it succeeds. But if the owner of the nature preserve was like, you know what, I'm going to kill all the elephants. There's nothing the hedge funds could do. There's nothing the investors could do. There's nothing anybody could do because they have that much power.
You mentioned Blackstone,
Mhm.
and that was the start of it. That was the hedge fund.
No, I can't remember if it was like a private equity company or what type of company like structure it was. But yeah, it was a massive investment firm.
So it started with Blackstone.
That's at least where Larry Fink came from. The guy, I can't remember his name, the guy who started Vanguard, he started the index fund. So that was his his kind of baby. He polished up the index fund and said, this is a way that the average person could buy the whole market. And so obviously that grew pretty quick because the minute that happened, that's the whole active versus passive investing world. So every 401k at that point decided to start to make that shift over into the passive side, into these index funds. And so it was a lot easier for that to grow. But BlackRock, instead of Vanguard, so Vanguard grew a little bit more steady, a little bit more organically. BlackRock took full advantage and still does of governments and power. Their big break, they grew, they did all that. They were successful and grew, but where they grew to become untouchable is when in 2008, they were given the reins to, exactly like you said, JP Morgan back in 1907, when he took the reins to handle that meltdown. The administration in 2008 gave BlackRock the reins to handle the worldwide financial crisis.
But how and why? I guess we go back to fear. Going back to the tsunami example, when it's chaotic and scary, people's supposed to look to the president.
Yeah.
Right? That's our leader.
Mm-hmm.
When the leader's scared and doesn't know what to do, they look to BlackRock. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, now.
I'm still trying to get at why. What do you think BlackRock's end goal is? Is it just, is it like when somebody tries to buy everything on Amazon, they just want to hoard it and hoard it and hoard it? Is that sort of like, how big can I get this thing? Or like,
I wish I knew, right? And that's something that I've read countless books on and articles and tried to figure out like what's their plan? Because they have power. Maybe it's more power, right? Just like somebody who has a lot of money, they always want more money. Maybe it is power. Because Larry Fink, from a net worth perspective, he's not that wealthy. He's a billionaire for sure, but he's not like a Elon or a Bezos level of wealth. But he has 10 times more power than either of those guys.
That is a fascinating dynamic because, what we were saying, at least what I was saying, was that money leads to power. But now what you're telling me is that he doesn't have all the money. If you were to tell me that he's just trying to be number one, him, Elon, Bezos, that's a game that makes sense to me. Like, okay, it's all ego driven. I want to have the most wealth in the world.
Right.
That's like a old Dr. Seuss book or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
But you're saying that it's more he's got more power despite not having as much wealth or money in the bank. I know me personally, I don't want $1 trillion. I'll take it, but that's not a goal of mine. I mentioned it very briefly last time. wealth in my mind is time.
Mhm.
What are you doing with your time? Maybe this is fun for him, trying to gain power. But at the end of the day, it's like, I would just like to do what I want to do, maybe help somebody out here and there. And,
Yeah.
you can put that on my headstone. That's fine.
Yeah.
So trying to kind of pull at these threads on motivation of what these guys are doing, I can understand I want to have the most money in the world. But what you're telling me is that you're saying he's not close.
No. I mean, he's still a billionaire, which is a hell of an achievement in and of itself. But in terms of just a massive amount of billions, no, he's nowhere close to Bezos or Musk or Zuckerberg or any of those guys.
What's an example of when he's abused his power?
Yeah, but I think the example I gave earlier of how the government was like, please help us, please help America. And he went and bought his own companies, not him personally, right? But BlackRock went and bought their own ETFs to prop that up, right? And I think going back to your point of the president and why do we give that power to BlackRock? Why do we even ask them, or Vanguard, but BlackRock being the number one, I'd say it is that power, right? And that's why he wields so much power. If you have the majority of the pension plans and for unions, and you have a majority of the 401ks, and you have 90% majority shareholding power of the S&P 500 companies, what does the American people care about? They care about the economy, right? We've talked about this in other episodes. They vote with their wallets, and politicians want whatever's going to get the vote. So if BlackRock wants something done, they just say, oh, well, if you don't do this, guess we're going to have to squash this. Guess we're going to have to change that. Guess we're going to have to sell this. That's no good. They're not going to do that, right? So because of that power, they can do whatever they want. And they consistently just keep putting ex-BlackRock executives and higher ups in positions of power in the government.
So maybe it is a little bit of The Sims, where maybe it's not money, but with that power, they can have leverage on public officials and policy, and push some sort of. They think the world should be a certain way. They can push their policy agenda in that fashion. Okay, so what then? If I'm graduating college and I've got this worldview, well, maybe I went to class and I already knew all this stuff.
Yeah.
But let's say I didn't. Let's say I got a degree in art.
Okay.
And I look to the market, and I have this pie in the sky idea of, well, there's winners and losers. You take a little risk. I don't know that we've proven it, but we've said enough to allude to the fact that it's a rigged game.
Mm-hmm.
That if I go to a casino and there's a card cheat, maybe I run into a hand here and there, whether poker, blackjack, and maybe I collect some chips at some point. But the fact that the game's rigged, the longer I sit there, the more they're taking from me. That's a clear draw. That's a clear parallel to the stock market. So let's say I have my art degree and I've got this pie in the sky view of Wall Street. And then I listen to Control Alt Invest and I go, wow, what a fraudulent scam that is.
Yeah.
What would I do? I mean, how do we start rolling it back? And there have been politicians who've tried, right?
Sure.
Elizabeth Warren comes to mind.
Yeah, but she's a lot of talk. The problem is most of the politicians that have tried don't last long because of the power and the money. It's very easy for BlackRock to be like, oh yeah, you're from this tiny town that relies on this one giant company that's there. Well, I'm just going to sell everything we own in that company and squash that company and then flip that seat to a guy who agrees with what we want to do, right? So that's pretty easy. But yeah, I'd say probably none of the establishment candidates or establishment politicians have ever stepped in front of BlackRock or Vanguard, and never would.
Yeah, I mean we're spineless at this point. It's money driven, and you have to bow down.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren's gone and spoken to BlackRock a couple times, right? And they all have. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? Obama administration was the one in 2008 that gave them the power. Biden's economic advisor was from BlackRock. Trump's current undersecretary of the Treasury is from BlackRock, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. BlackRock runs the show.
Now, when you say that, it's easy to think initially. I was like, okay, this Larry Fink guy or one person. I mean, is this a family company or what if I wanted to go to work at BlackRock? And what if I wanted to gain power?
Yeah, I mean, you could move up for sure. You could move up, and that's their specialty, right? So Larry created it, but like their whole shtick is we're going to continue to gain more power, and how we're going to gain more power is A, more money, B, training up and nurturing the people in our company, and then putting them in positions of power. It's the easiest way to do it, right? They don't want a congressman that's from BlackRock. They want that congressman's chief of staff, right? They want that congressman's policy writer to come from BlackRock. They want, whatever. They want and they don't want the head of the treasury to be from BlackRock. They want the undersecretary of the treasury to be from BlackRock, right? They operate in the shadows for a reason, because it allows them to hold power, right? The minute that people start going like, oh shit, like why is our president, our vice president, and our head of the treasury, why are they all from BlackRock? Maybe we should look into that. Like why is this? And then they start digging. But as long as that doesn't happen, as long as you keep getting your 5-10% returns on your 401ks, you're not going to ask questions.
That's right. Yeah, that goes back to comfort. And they say, I saw this recently, that comfort stifles innovation or something to that effect, where, it's like my friend that I was talking about. He wants his comfy, cozy life. And I'm not, again, I've said this a million times. I'm not against that. I don't think you have to run as fast as you can on a treadmill to be successful in life. You're just without any sort of agency, and you're at the mercy of what all these market forces are. Going back to the casino example, it's going to work out sometimes. There are people who got in, 401, retired, they get their, they take their yearly vacation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think going back to your point earlier of like, someone with an art degree coming in and having this idea about the markets, and I like the casino analogy, but I think it's more along the lines of like, that old saying of like, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the slowest guy that's running against the bear. I think the same could be said for the market, right? Like if BlackRock's the bear, they're going to eat. They're going to always eat, but you don't necessarily, they're not going to eat everyone. So you just have to outrun the slower ones, right? So if you have a angle on the market that you think is right and smart, you could for sure be successful. That's why hedge funds do what they do, and go buy the Mets. But I think, I think overall, the world and the world of money gets adjusted based off of what those two companies think.
Well, let's talk about Vanguard, because we've really, we've talked a ton here about BlackRock and the power that they yield. When you first started talking to me about BlackRock, honestly, I feel like I've heard of it, but I never really heard of it. We'll just go with that.
Yeah.
Vanguard, through various companies I've been in, my 401's been with Vanguard.
Mm-hmm.
So what's their angle?
They retain a lot less power in government, but they control a lot more of the passive money in the economy. So BlackRock is a lot more big ticket items, a lot more of like government debt, a lot more of like government solutions, right? If you mixed a bank, a hedge fund, and a consultant, that's kind of BlackRock, right? Like a government consultant, hedge fund, and a bank. Vanguard is way more on the bank side in terms of they manage a lot more 401ks because of the index funds that they've created, right? And the target funds, right? Of like, I'm going to retire at this date. Yeah. Things like that. All those things that Vanguard created and was the original creators of, allowed them to capture the everyday person's money very, very early, that BlackRock didn't have access to as early as they did. So BlackRock is starting to kind of pull the reins of that and start to capture some of that, but they still have a long way to go.
Let's end with this. Let's say I want to be Larry Fink. Let's say I'm not an old man like I am now, and I'm young and ambitious. Do you know what I would go about to even if let's say I had 100 years to do it? Well, let me back off that. When did BlackRock, do you know when were they founded?
I want to say, and this could just be because you've said the 80s over and over again. So, but I think it was the 80s.
So I was thinking about this the other day because, the Rockefellers, JP Morgan, They built industry. That's how they amassed wealth, and then they went from there. How did I know you said Blackstone was the first part of it, but okay, even if we call it 40, 50 years, that's well within a lifetime to build this up. And so if I want to have shadow agents in the government, is that fair to say, or did I take that too far?
Oh, no, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. If I want to have shadow agents in the government, starting today, I need to build a company. I need to start certainly getting assets under management, right? And then what?
Create a product. And so in Vanguard's case, that was the index fund. In BlackRock's case, it was their AI agent that they built way before this whole ChatGPT thing, right? Way, way, way long ago.
When? This is interesting to me because I was going to go to AI. That's what I was going to talk about was blockchain, AI, whatever.
They've had it. It's a black box, essentially, called Aladdin. And it is a de-risking AI system, is how they describe it. And it's proprietary, and they created this system, and that's what catapulted them, because it allowed them to do things that Vanguard couldn't, and especially with large sums of money, as opposed to like 401ks spread out over a lot of companies. They were allowed they were able to do things, and not just from the S&P 500 standpoint, right? So Vanguard, obviously they can go into bonds, they can do all that stuff as well. But if you're looking at from a worldwide perspective on every single market on planet Earth, every bonds and treasuries and, whatever options, everything, Aladdin can handle it. And so that allowed them to earn trust from corporations as well as small governments, and then small governments led into big governments. And then as they accumulated good faith or whatever with governments, then they started to get really more and more power.
So just reading this back, Aladdin is the secret weapon for wealth creation.
Yeah.
Like I just tell it, you're saying that they built this thing to just say, go, here's the rules of the market. You can buy and sell shares. You can do options. You can do index funds. You can do my own index funds.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't researched Aladdin enough to understand exactly what it does and what it doesn't. I do know that it did allow them to create a lot of wealth very quickly. I don't know if it was like a quant, like they use it hedge funds where like you said, like, here's all the rules, buy and sell for us. I don't know if it's like that, or if it's purely of it can analyze risk and then take action based off of those risks, or maybe it just analyzes a bazillion data points and then gives you what you should do, and then you have to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I do know that they did semi-recently start giving that to banks and governments as well.
Well, not giving.
Oh, yeah, not exactly. Yeah, definitely not giving.
That is, we take this hardline approach, and at the end of these conversations, I always end up with, I kind of like that. I think it's great. The whole idea of getting off the ground on this planet, in America, anyways, when you have the freedom to do so, is find a need in the market and fill it. Have some sort of product. Maybe you're the first person who invented tennis shoes. I like that they were first to AI and said, all right, let's build this product, whatever. There's a common tenet of like, all right, if by the time you get into something, you've missed the wave.
Yeah.
And that can be a frustrating thing. It's not completely true. Like there's, markets evolve. There was, Skype was first and now Zoom exists.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny to think about AI where, this is this new green space, but behind the scenes, this has already been mastered before it ever came to public view from the powers that be, which is that's a little bit of a conspiracy theory take, I feel like.
Yeah, probably. I don't know how, right? Because there's a ton of different types of AI. So I don't necessarily know if it is like a large language model like it is now. But yeah, in terms of it has been talked about as being an AI system for decades, not just the past couple of years, for sure.
Well, it all boils down to math. So that's been around forever. So yeah, you're right. modern day AI to me, when I start thinking about it, we go straight to talking to a computer and it just giving you something back that you want. But you're right. But before the language models, there was plenty of predictive models, forecasting. That's all.
Yeah.
Essentially, you can call it AI if you want.
Right.
It was data science for a while. That was hot, and now it's AI. But at the core,
Yeah, and I think Larry, I think the power point earlier is interesting because and the fact that he did what he did off of a product, right? With Aladdin, it catapulted him to where he is. But if he had taken the route like Michael Bloomberg did, where he just said, "I'll sell it to every investor out there," he could be worth $100+ billion right now. But instead, he said, "No, I'm not giving it to anyone, but I am going to accumulate an immense amount of power because of it."
well, you told me before we hit record that he's an awful human being.
Yeah.
And I do want to put a bow on this it's one thing that there could be, I don't know, there's got to be a historical figure who had a lot of power that was good.
Yeah.
Or is that not a thing?
Yeah. I think it depends. Yeah. I'm sure there are.
Going to Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, and he chose to do things right
Yeah.
and well until he got overthrown, exiled, what have you. Larry Fink could take this power and use it for good somehow, but you say that he doesn't.
Yeah.
You said he's a terrible person.
Yeah. Personally, right? That's my personal take. Based off of the way that his company has operated over the past few decades. I think it's he is time and time again squashed the average person so that his company can gain more power, or he's squashed the government or the economy or pulled levers to make that happen, or politicians or whoever in order to prop up his own company.
Little late to getting to this, but is Zuckerberg in the same vein? Because he's another one who's like, this is my company, squashes competition, which, again, it's capitalist America without oversight in place.
Yeah.
That can happen. But do you think that that's what he's after? Because now he's hanging out with Trump.
Yeah. I have no idea. I have no idea what Zuckerberg's plan is, but I think it goes back to money versus power and right? Like in capitalism and that sort of thing. Like BlackRock and Zuckerberg, or BlackRock and Meta or whatever, are two totally different playing fields, right? One's a company. I think you could probably put Zuckerberg and Elon in the same bucket in terms of like what they're after.
For now.
Yeah, but Larry Fink is at a level that is far superior to all of them combined.
What a depressing conversation.
Yeah.
What's next? We got to talk about something positive next time.
Yeah. I don't know.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
We'll figure out what we do instead. Let's get out of this rigged game.
Yeah.
For now, James, another Control Alt Invest. Let's hit reset.
Let's do it.